Hello and welcome to the week 2 roundup for the Jane Austen MOOC. I'm Alison, I'm a mature PhD student and I'm one of the tutors on the MOOC, and I'm going to be with you to do the roundup this week. First up, I need to say that I've got a little bit of a cough. I'm coming to the end of something, don't know what it is, so if I do cough or if my voice goes a bit grating, I apologise for that in advance. I'd like to thank you all for the interaction and the fantastic communication that's been going on the message boards this week. It's been absolutely amazing, and I know for a number of you out there that this is actually quite an important decompression activity, not just an isolation activity, but something that's enabling all of us really to get away from what's happening in the world at the moment and immerse ourselves in some wonderful books, some wonderful literature, and in a time which for many is a lot more gentle and a lot more comforting than what's going on outside our front doors. I had a few technical issues this morning. I can't, for some reason, record this on my university laptop, so I'm having to do it on my phone. So apologies for wobbly camera work, and also if I need to bend down and get my notes. So again, apologies for that in advance. I'd like to start by picking up on something that Kim spoke about last week. She began her roundup by talking about how much Austen was engaging with her own society and how much of Regency society we can really see in the novels. And this was something which was coming out quite strongly on the message boards last week and also into this week. Where people were asking or thinking about the question, how can we, or indeed should we, be using the novels as some sort of historical source? And if you are looking at the novels as a sort of factual source, how do you go about that? And which factors do you trust, given that Austen ultimately was writing fiction? Now, one of the things that we've been looking at this week that pertains to that really is the idea of money. Now, everybody knows that Austen was very, very careful about her use of money. Her use of money is very precise, as she would have said, very nice in the books. And there's a lot that we can learn both from Austen's own family background and her experience of money, but also about her society more generally. Now, I recommended a book by a chap called Edward Copeland who talks about money, and something called The Blessed Competence. The book is Women Writing About Money, and he is very, very interesting in that he has taken the amounts of money, the annual incomes of some of Austen's characters, and he is able to put very, very precise social stratification on that. So, for example, if you have £500 per annum, which is what the Dashwoods have to live on at Barton Cottage, Copeland says that this is what the Austen family retire on to Bath, and it will buy you 3 servants. And this is indeed what the Dashwoods had at Barton Cottage. And also, when the Austen family went to Bath, this is what they took with them. They took with them 2 maids and 1 manservant. Now, if we go up the scale a little bit, Copeland says that between £800 and £1,000 income a year would get you a carriage. And this is really a crucial sign of consumer prosperity. So it's very, very significant in Emma when Mr. Perry sets up a carriage. So his income and social pretensions really become the focus for the village to talk about. But what that means is that Mr. Perry's income is round about £1,000. Now, Copeland gives some other examples of this. So Robert Ferrers buys a carriage on the strength of his mother promising him £1,000 per annum. And Mrs. Dashwood relinquishes her carriage when her income drops to £500. If we go up a little bit further, between £4,000 and £5,000 a year will get you a house in the country. And it also means that you can partake of the London season. You can spend the winter in London, as the Dashwoods do, as the guests of Mrs. Jennings. This is also, Copeland says, where the phrase go to town comes from, because it means that you have enough money. You are literally able to go to town. The Bertrams go to town on £7,000 per annum, and Mr. Rushworth, of course, he's just about the richest person with £12,000 per annum, I think, in any Austen novel. He has a house in London, but of course Mary Crawford thinks that Edmund, if she married him, would be able to have a house in town, and this worries Fanny quite substantially, because Edmund's income, even with Mary's fortune, would give them an annual income of £1,700 a year, which just isn't enough. So Mary, effectively, by insisting on having a house in town, is threatening to bankrupt them. We can also, of course, see this in Persuasion, where the loss of the London season is an indication of how the Elliot family are having to retrench. Now, one of the things that people have been really active in engaging with this week on the MOOC, has been the idea of money and as social capital. And of course, we've now talked about what money meant in terms of Jane Austen society. In terms of Jane Austen herself, she led quite a sort of financially constrained life, as we've been able to see from her own records and from the letters, and no doubt at all that the income that she gained from writing gave her something of a respite from that. But really, she was financially dependent for her whole life on the menfolk around her. One very interesting thing to note, which has been talked about on the boards, is of course how Austen's own life, mirrored the Dashwoods, and also the potential fate of the Bennet sisters, because Mr. Austen, although he was a clergyman, they weren't poor by any means, but he lived up to his income. He ran a carriage, and when he died, the two Austen sisters, Jane and Cassandra, together with their mother, were left in quite severely straitened circumstances. And we can see this echoed in the plot of Sense and Sensibility, which of course was written after Mr. Austen's death, although there may possibly have been an earlier draft. And we can certainly see it in Pride and Prejudice, where Mrs. Bennet, and I do feel a little bit for Mrs. Bennet. I know she's a comic character. I know that she is written as a very silly woman, but actually she has a better grasp of the fate that is going to befall herself and the girls when Mr. Bennet dies than Mr. Bennet does himself, because she is concerned that he too, like Mr. Austen and like Mr. Dashwood Senior, Mr. Henry Dashwood, that he is living up to his income and that nothing is saved for them, and that they potentially will be in very difficult circumstances. And this is something which Austen knew from experience. People have also been talking about the marriage market, and people have been very, very interested in the treasury, the key to the treasury of the ladies. And there's been big debate about whether or not this is something which continues today. Now, we have the Sunday Times Rich List. The Tatler magazine do the list of most eligible bachelors. And really, I think this goes beyond marriageability, and perhaps it just goes to an endless fascination that we have with those who are rich and privileged. We love glamour magazines as a society. We love hearing about the rich and famous and celebrities. We like Hello magazine because it takes photographs of them all in their own luxury, beautifully decorated homes. We love reading about these things because it is a form of escapism. And to a certain extent, this is what Austen's novels are, although they are incredibly realistic and we identify with the characters because we see them as real people. We feel their emotions. There is a very strong Cinderella element to some of the stories. The women who bag the wealthy men, like Mr. Darcy, come from straitened circumstances. Colonel Brandon is very rich in Sense and Sensibility compared to the Dashwoods. He is beyond Marianne's expectations, really. But she still manages to snare him. And even in Persuasion, Anne Elliot, you can see her playing the sort of Cinderella role. That, you know, she doesn't have a lot of money because it's all gone, but also she's sort of slightly dowdy, downtrodden, but she gets her man. You know, this is a very strong narrative theme that runs through Austen's books and is a form of escapism. We all want to believe that our lives are better. We all want to believe that there is a better life out there for us if only we can find it. And Austen very much feeds into this. So I just wanted to say a little bit about the marriage market, because marriage really was a commercial transaction at that point. We're still not yet out of the period where daughters had to marry who their parents said they should marry. We do have a rise in what is known as the affective marriage, so marriage for love. This isn't a completely new phenomenon. Now, there are some historians who will try and tell you that marriage for love did not exist before the late 18th century, and this is just not true. I spent quite a long time studying the late Middle Ages, and one of the defining social characteristics amongst sort of shopkeepers, the professional urban classes of the late Middle Ages, was that they chose their own marriage partners. The age of marriage was relatively late, sort of in your 23, 24, 25, when you'd finished your apprenticeship, but you chose your marriage partner. There's a fantastic Valentine from the late Middle Ages, from the Paston letters, the famous Paston letters. So it's not an entirely new phenomenon, but it's something which gains cultural acceptance and significance really at the end of the 18th century. But money was still at the heart of a marriage settlement. So when a lady of good social standing agreed to marry a gentleman, a legally binding document was drawn up outlining how the finances would work, what money she would retain for her own use, and how much essentially her father was going to pay her husband for marrying her. And there was a very strong expectation that the husband was going to have free reign of this money that the father was going to give him, that he would have access to it, and that he would be able to do whatever he wanted with it. This was in legal cases, this was restated as being a reasonable expectation of the husband. Now, this, of course, is a completely different type of marriage that we're used to these days, but we can still see it in the novels. I mean, when Lydia elopes, one of the urgent things that has to be done is to draw up marriage articles, and this is one of the things that Darcy and Mr. Gardiner are able to do. Just moving on quickly, that we've also on the message boards been talking a little bit about gardens, and people have been interacting really, really well with the Mansfield Park. That's right, the Mansfield Park exercise, where you've been reading the chapters with the garden scenes, and I just wanted to pick up on a couple of things from there. The first is that lots of people have absolutely accurately identified that the garden scene, it allows the characters' personalities and also their moral worth to come forth. You can see who the characters really are by how they behave in those scenes. However, what I'd like you to do, and there's a few people who have done it, and I've pinned a couple of comments today, is to go back and think what the symbolic value of the various pieces of landscape are, and also who moves in which part of the landscape. So there is the garden, for example, the very formal garden, and then you go through to the wilderness, and then there's the gate, which is highly significant, who goes through the gate and in what manner they go through the gate. And finally, there's the parkland beyond. Just wanted to say very quickly a few things about the garden. We think today of gardens as being places of tranquility and of beauty and of rest and recuperation. And certainly in the history of literature, that has been a role for nature, but there's also a secondary role for gardens. Gardens can very often be a scene of temptation, and writers from Edmund Spenser through to John Milton have brought this out. We can see in Paradise Lost, for example, the Garden of Eden is very, very beautiful, but it is also a place of testing and temptation. And again, the idea of the wilderness itself, that again has biblical references within it, in that Christ during Lent went out into the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights and was tempted by the devil. So, do we think that Austen, the clergyman's daughter, is doing something symbolic here with the idea of the wilderness and the garden, and who is the tempter? And if this is the Garden of Eden, who is playing which role? So that might be something that you'd like to think about. And finally, just a very quick word about the music. Do go and explore the music section. Have a look. If you're musical, please play some of the music that's available. And for Camille, you were asking about wanting to listen to some of the music. If you go through the blog, there's a link to a blog. If you go through the blog, there is a sound file with some music, and it's a piece that was in Austen's own collection, and it's variations on the tune Robin Adair. Now, this has very, very special significance for anybody whose favourite novel is Emma, because it's probably one of the pieces of music that was delivered with Jane Fairfax's Broadwood piano. So this was not only a piece of music that featured in Austen's own personal music collection and that she almost certainly played, but it's one that features sort of as a subtext in Emma as well, and it's a piece of music that's about two lovers who are parted. So again, that sort of gives an extra clue to the whole Jane Fairfax and Frank Churchill conundrum that's going on. I hope you're enjoying the weeks. We've got lots and lots to look forward to in week 3 next week. We're so grateful for all the interaction. Keep talking to each other, keep posting on the boards, and we will do our best to answer any queries that you've got. And please, everybody, stay safe, stay healthy, and enjoy this wonderful world that Austen has created for us and that we can use as a refuge from our own. Stay healthy. Bye-bye.